Okay, welcome. Hello. Welcome to the first program in the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's series on the Catskills on the big and small screen. My name is Thorin Tritter, and I am the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center in Glen Cove, New York. Our Catskills film series builds on a program that we presented last September about the history of the Catskills, which was part of a larger effort to draw attention to the culture of the Yiddish-speaking world of Eastern Europe that the Nazis tried to destroy, but which was transplanted, at least in part, into the United States. The Catskills, as you know, became the most well-known playground and summer retreat for Yiddish-speaking and other Jewish residents of the Northeast in the post-war period. Before I go on to say more about our program tonight and to introduce our speaker, I wanted to put just a plug, an advertisement about some of our other upcoming programs. And I know we had a slide about this. I'm hoping that somebody could pop that slide back up if they are possible to share their screen. Anyway, so here you can see the programs I wanted to highlight. We've got next Tuesday, our cooking demonstration that follows up on a challah baking program we did last month. This time, Jason Lee, the chef and owner of Long Island Pekin, will demonstrate how to make scallion pancakes following his own family's recipe. We hope that through this program, we can use cooking as a way to build bridges between ethnic communities and make you think about your own family recipes. So that's coming up next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. Then next Wednesday at noon, I'll be holding my next Curator's Corner program, part of a regular series of programs that I started about individual objects in our collection. My program next week will be about a letter in our museum that was part of Sabina Gitman's effort to escape the Nazis. It's a window into the bureaucratic hurdles that were put up in the way of Jews fleeing Nazi-controlled Europe. And one more program to mention, on Tuesday, March 9th at 6:30 p.m., we'll be holding the second program in this film series, when we'll screen the 1987 film Sweet Lorraine and then host a discussion with Dr. Linda Berghard. As always, you can find details about these and all our programs under the Events tab on our website, www.hmtcli.org. Okay, let's talk about today's program. I am delighted to kick off our series with a screening of an episode from the hit series, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And we are honored to have with us Dr. Linda Berghard, who presented such a fabulous program about the golden age of the Catskills back in September. Dr. Berghard is a journalist and author, and I'm pleased to say the scholar in residence at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. She holds a PhD from LIU Post and is the daughter of Holocaust survivors and spent several summers in the Catskills, so she has a personal connection to this topic. Her career has included working as a freelance reporter for the New York Times for 20 years, and she's also the author of 3 nonfiction books and numerous articles and essays that have been published in newspapers across the United States and overseas. She lectures widely to both national and international audiences, and I'm very pleased to welcome her again to our virtual stage to set up our program this evening. So thank you, Linda. And what are we going to look at tonight?
Good, thank you very much, Thorin. So let's see. Okay, let me see. All right. I am up, but there we go. Okay. So just to start, so very happy to be here today to talk to you about this enormously popular award-winning series, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which streams on Prime Video, Amazon's channel. So here, to begin, is our star. Here she is. And I thought I'd start by giving you a bit of background about the show to help put the episode we're going to watch today in context. So the show is set in the 50s and the 60s, and here's the basic premise. So Midge Maisel is a young upper middle class Jewish wife and mother living in New York City. And so one night after seeing her husband do his stand-up comedy routine at the Gaslight Cafe, he did a particularly terrible job. And she decided she could do better. So she decided that she would take a chance and do one herself. So the audience loved her. And she discovers that she has a talent for stand-up comedy. And she decides to pursue a professional career in this thrilling but very difficult field, one in which there are almost no successful women. So where did the idea of the show come from? So some critics have said that Midge's story is based loosely on the life and career of Joan Rivers. So you may remember her as the outspoken, controversial American actress and comedian of the era, and she was known for her sharply acerbic comedy routines with and without inappropriate language as she deemed necessary. So Joan's explanation of her success, she said, "I succeed by saying what everyone else is thinking and no one else will say." And so this, of course, is not so different from what Midge Maisel has in mind. So now in the 50s and the 60s, as we know, if you were Jewish and a New Yorker, the resort area in the Catskills was the place to go. It was the Borscht Belt. It was very appealing and very inviting. And going on vacation at that time meant going to the Catskills. And also, the Catskills were known at that time for first-class comedy routines. And thus, it's only reasonable that Midge's family would take an annual summer vacation there. And then also, Midge would want to see if she could find an opportunity to develop her fledgling career. So in this part of the series, it is 1959. And where else would the Weissmans, Midge and her family, go on vacation? So in season 2, episode 4, we're going to the Catskills, which is what we're about to view together. They take off for the Steiner Mountain Resort, a fancy Catskills hotel that is said to cater to affluent Jewish people. So Midge, her father Abe, and her mother Rose, and Midge's 2 young children, a son Ethan and a baby daughter Esther, they set off for the vacation resort that they go to every summer. Midge and her husband Joel are separated over his affair with his secretary, but he shows up too. And turns out that Joel and his parents, the Maisels of the title, are also vacationing there at the same time as the Weissmans. Of course, chaos ensues. How could it not? The show is at heart a soap opera, complete with the requisite melodrama and sentimentality. So a crucial element of this genre is the open-ended narrative of the story. The stories span many episodes, and the one we'll watch tonight is actually number 12 in a series of 26 so far. More are being made as we speak. And because of the popularity of this genre, many studies have been conducted on soap opera loyalty. And each episode in a classic soap opera ends with the promise that the storyline will continue in yet another episode, which is just what happens, even with some ending in the typical cliffhanger that makes you want to watch more. You have to find out what happens. And so, as we know, the soap opera formula works. The longest running soap opera, Guiding Light, began on TV in 1952, and it had transitioned from a radio show, which had begun a full 15 years earlier. And this soap ran until 2009. So these are the original serials dating all the way back to the Victorian days of Charles Dickens, which we see in many new forms today on streaming TV. My apologies to Mr. Dickens, of course. In any case, the Weissman family, having left their comfortable Upper West Side apartment, find themselves in the lush surroundings of the fictional Steiner's Resort, Steiner's Mountain Resort, as it's called, actually in real life, a real place called Scott's Family Resort in Deposit, New York. So that's a bit west of the Catskills, about an hour further toward Corning, if you know the geography of upstate New York. So it's a beautiful country place with a big hotel, also individual cottages, a lavish clubhouse, rolling green lawns, round-the-clock activities, exhilarating mountain views, and even a sparkling lake. So Midge's budding comedy career is secret. She's hiding her performances from her family, from her parents, her estranged husband, for several reasons, including her correct assumption that they would not approve, and also in the hopes of developing her own voice without having to worry about pleasing them or apologizing to them for alienating them. So the episode we're about to see is a setup for Midge to perform, which she does in the next episode. and get in trouble with her father, and then reconcile with him in the episode after that. Then the vacation is over and the Weissmans go back home and continue their adventurous experiences in a different setting, be it Paris, Miami, or Las Vegas, all of which come into play in the series. But why did the producers pick the Catskills for a family trip? So for one thing, a change of venue is always pleasing to the viewing audience. For another, the Catskill Resorts provided a natural setting for Midge's comedy development, as they were known as a virtual college for comedians. And most important, it was the place at the time where Jewish vacationers went. And that was because they could go without having to worry about anti-Semitism. Now, what should we look for in the episode we're about to see? If you went to the Catskills in the 50s and 60s or even later, are the activities like the ones that you experienced? Do the people look like those that you remember? Does the setting seem right to you? Do the clothes and hairstyles look right, look like what you saw at that time? Do the porch rockers and the dining room decor look right? Do the guests and the staff seem representative of those that you saw and interacted with way back then? So when Mrs. Maisel came out, the TV critics raved about the series, and they especially liked episodes 4, 5, and 6, all of which take place in the Catskills. They said the show was playful yet poignant and gave it critical acclaim and numerous Emmy Awards and Golden Globes. So let's watch it now and see what you think. And when it's over, please do tell us your reactions and let's have a discussion. So I hope you enjoy the show.
So welcome back. I hope everybody enjoyed the screening. If you have questions for Linda, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom and enter your questions. To get us started, I do have a couple of questions of my own. And so Linda, if I could start with, could you talk to us a little about why the Catskills would be used in this TV series or in other films? Why is there still such resonance of the Catskills?
Oh, so many reasons. For one thing, the people who went there remember it with great fondness. There was so much there that people liked, and it was such a sense of community that stayed with people. It was a safe place to go. It was a beautiful place to go. It was only an hour and a half from New York City, easy to get to, and it had all levels of accommodations, from very inexpensive ones to the bungalow colonies, which people loved, to the small hotels where you didn't have to do your own cooking, which you had to do in the bungalow colonies, to the big fancy resorts like we just saw at Steiner's. And so it was it's very evocative for people to look back at it. And for this series, Midge is trying to become a comedian. So she has to practice in a whole lot of places and seek success. And so that's one of I think the main reason that the family went to the Catskills in this show.
Yeah, I mean, even though I said I don't really watch this whole series, but I could see where there's some foreshadowing about the comedy with Tony Shalhoub's character being funny, and obviously we know that Midge is going to get these gigs later on. Before we talk more about humor, though, can you tell us a little about what's particularly Catskilly, if that's, I know that's not a word, but what in this episode really evokes something that was distinctively about the Catskills? Or maybe you could say it doesn't.
No, it really does. There are things wrong with it, but there's a lot that evokes the Catskills. For one thing, the sense of community. There were activities. It was announced on the loudspeaker that such and such is happening now in such and such a building. And so it's not the kind of place where you go and you're by yourself. There are all sorts of ways in which the community supports the people who are staying there. And that's really a big one. They all show up for the fireworks. There's the bathing beauty contest. There are all these things that they do together. And that's really a big one, the structured group activities and the colony-like setting. And then, of course, there's the Yiddishkeit. There are all kinds of expressions. During the dance, the young guy who wants to meet this girl who he's too shy to talk to, you know, when Midge says she'll help him, he says, you know, Maisel Tov. And, you know, there are all these comments that go on during the orientation, which was so interesting, that there's an orientation, like everybody's supposed to show up at the same time. In the song, there was something about, this really surprised me, something so nice for all of us Israelites. Now, it rhymed, but what? I mean, there's lots of people who went to the Catskills who were not Jewish. It's not as if it was a synagogue. There was much more to it than that. But of course, there was a very heavy Jewish element.
Yeah, you know, I wondered about that when, I mean, there's a specific reference in this episode to a gathering of Holocaust survivors by the lake.
Yes.
Does that seem like a reasonable thing to have imagined would have happened in resorts in the Catskills?
Theoretically, yes, but it was rather crudely put. And so it's not like, oh, let's all meet for manicures at 5 o'clock. You know, it's such an enormous issue. And I don't think it would just be in the newsletter like that. But maybe that's why Benjamin has that line, because it's absurd. And much of the series is kind of satirical and absurd like that. Things are very overdone, but they're fun because of that. They move fast. People speak very quickly to each other. That whole scene when they first move into the cottage, where everybody's talking at the same time, which, you know, is fun to watch, but also it is kind of a Jewish thing that people do say, that if you go to a dinner, a Shabbat dinner or Yom Kippur, or maybe not so much Yom Kippur, but a more happy, you know, Seder, let's say, that people are all talking at once.
Or for Purim, like today.
Right.
We're holding our program on Purim.
Yes.
I see a couple of questions have come in, so let me mention those to you. One person says, aside from the geography, was there a similar experience in the Poconos? What's the difference between the Poconos and the Catskills?
Well, the Poconos are much less Jewish. So there was much less of a sense of everybody's here together, and more of a sense of we're all going to this place, but we're not necessarily all going to talk to each other. So the Catskills had something special that way. And the other thing also is that the Catskills had this tremendous reputation for entertainment. And the Poconos had some, but not very much. But a great deal of the entertainment at the Catskills was comedy. People loved it. And most of the comedians at the time were Jewish. It's just the way it worked.
So not just entertainment in the sense of entertaining activities, but particular shows of comedians or singers.
Right. Yeah, there were shows every night. Sometimes on Saturday nights, there could be 10 or 15 shows at different hotels. And you had to choose, or you could go to one at 8 and one at 10 and one at midnight.
Another question comes in, and I think this is just about stereotypes. Where are the children? How could these be Jewish mothers? Lois Lutwin asks. So, yeah, I mean, we have a stereotypical view of the Jewish mother as very focused on the needs of the children, and yet the children are absent here.
Yes, well, Lois, thank you for that question. I found it very disturbing that the children are absent. The little boy is taken away to camp right away, but camp is not 24 hours. The baby's left in the car, and, you know, Jimmy is told, get my luggage, and, you know, get the baby too, as an afterthought. So, and then they never show up in this segment. They do in others, but they're mostly just kids, people who are in the way, or they're used as a device. It's very strange. Now, a lot of the issues in the show are today's issues, sort of today's cultural views put onto an old time when they didn't fit. And in today's world, when women are working full-time, they do have to juggle family and full-time work. So Midge is kind of letting go of her family or her children. She's very close to her parents. Her mother is almost like a sister. And so, but the children, they're just not there. So the Jewish mother thing, it's just not there. It's very strange, but it's not. Yeah.
There's people are posing a bunch of other questions, which is super. Thank you very much, everybody. Somebody says that they've been away from New York for over 30 years. Are the Catskills the same today? Are there still family resorts there?
No, sadly, no. No. Oh my goodness. The decline was very steep and very quick and very sad. And there's virtually nothing there.
When does the decline happen?
The decline was the 80s. Some hotels lasted till the 90s. One or two hung on. I think Kutcher's lasted until somewhere in the 2000s. But they weren't family oriented. They were just hanging on to try to stay alive. So no, I mean that whole thing is gone.
And you and I know that the film we're going to screen on the 9th of March, Sweet Lorraine, is about the end period, right? It's about in the 1980s and that
Yes.
period of decline.
Yes.
That's a very different depiction than what we see in this episode that we saw tonight.
Right.
But we're not going to say anything about that.
Nope.
Some other questions here. How much of going to the Catskills was just about getting out of the city and getting to some open space? Was that the appeal, or was there more to it?
Well, that's definitely part of it. You know, the change of venue, it is nice. As I mentioned in the introduction, the show does move to various places. But it's a place where Midge can perform and see how she does. And that's what happens in the next episode. So Susie, who is a very much of a 2021 character who would not have existed in 1959, even remotely, but she's very funny and very likable. But she does get Midge some gigs later on, and then she has a chance to strut her stuff, and her father sees her and gets mad, and there's all sorts of family issues. But it fits.
And in terms of in 1959 or in the 1960s, in the heyday of the Catskills, was it people who were going there for just to get the fresh air, or was there something else that lured people to the Catskills?
People were going for the fresh air and the beauty because it was a beautiful place, but they were looking for camaraderie, and it was very family oriented. And this is the odd thing about how the producers of this show have Midge just ignoring her kids. You know, they're not abused, they're taken care of by other people, but she's just not involved. And her mother is involved with her, but only in terms of ambition. So the whole Jewish mother thing, it's just not there.
Somebody is just typing in that there was a great single scene, and I think we see it a little here where we got the Paulie in the opening announcing who's just gotten married from meeting there, and the whole sense that we saw towards the end of the episode of Midge having, her mother wanting her to date somebody else. So do you also think of it as a single scene as well as the family scene?
Oh, it is. It's a kind of a matchmaking scene also. The mothers are looking, to get their kids together, and the young people who go there looking for people to date or possibly to marry. It's fertile ground, particularly if they're going to the part of the Catskills that was Jewish. Not all of the Catskills was. There's the Italian Alps also, not just the Jewish Alps. But the ones who were in that part of the Catskills were looking for a Jewish spouse. And, most Jews are family oriented. So I think the idea was you would date for a while and then get married and have children.
Sure.
Yeah.
Somebody is writing in that they are a third generation Jew from Denver, Colorado, and that the Catskills depicted here seems completely foreign. Was this just a New York phenomenon? Yeah.
Oh, that's a very good question. Yes, it's a New York phenomenon. It has nothing to do with anybody from Denver. It has nothing to do with the Midwest or the Far West or the South. It is a New York thing. And the accents are New York, and the sense of what Jews have missed in life, it's all things that they missed in the New York area. It's entirely different in a different part of the country. New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, so that little area. But even New England Jews would not relate. So if you came from Boston, you wouldn't have a bad time, but you wouldn't have that sense of being part of things. For example, all of the announcements that were made. That's a really clever part of this. And I've seen this episode now at least 3 times. So each time I see it, I hear something more. You know, like when when Paulie announces, Mr. Ziegelbaum, please come to the office. It's not an emergency, but it's also not an emergency. So that's a very New York thing. I don't think that would fly anywhere else in the country.
Somebody's asking about 2-month vacations. This also seems like maybe, is it just for this episode that they do this? Did people take 2 months off? How could, immigrant Jews or the descendants of immigrants be taking 2 months off in the summer? Is that realistic?
No, well, it's realistic only in nuanced terms. So Abe, the father, is a professor. He's a math professor, which is why he's counting everything and measuring things all the time. And so he has 2 months off in the summer. But how many people do? Almost nobody. So the way most of the things worked at the Catskills was that the family with the mother stayed for 2 months. And this was especially in the bungalow colonies. And then the fathers would come up on the weekends, on the husband expresses on Friday night, the buses and trains.
So, I mean, I know people who have their summers out in the Hamptons, and sometimes the husbands are working and then only come on the weekends, but the wife and children, or the spouse and children, are out there for the summer. So somewhat maybe not the same family group dynamic, but certainly people do that today.
Yeah, I mean, much less today, because today in most families, the wife and the husband work.
Both work.
And so, yeah, it doesn't really work that way. If you're very wealthy, sometimes the nanny and the children go there for the summer, and then both parents come up on the weekends. But it's very different than 1959. You know, they're living in this fancy apartment, and they have all these servants, and that's kind of unusual. You know, later on, there's an episode where the apartment has to be sold for a whole variety of reasons. But in 1959, there were very few co-ops in the city, in truth, and those that were restricted. So a Jew having a fancy large apartment on the Upper West Side, no. But that's okay. You know, little details like that are fine. I checked whether there was a U-Haul in 1959, and there was. Company started in 1937, so that works.
I'm just going to share a couple of comments that people have made. One person wrote, "Loved the Catskills, went many times, but never for the entire summer. I did laugh when Chicken Fat came on, the song. I used to exercise to that on a 45 record."
Ah, that's very
And the
funny.
soundtrack here is great. I mean, it really does help move this along.
Yes.
I don't know if they're all pieces from 1959, but it does add to the feel for this episode, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the songs really are from that era. They did very well with that. I don't know whether anyone paid attention to this, but in the band, everyone was white, except for the singer. And that was very interesting too. So they definitely did pay attention to the way things were back then, for better.
You know, I noticed that I've watched this a couple of times, and I noticed it this time, and I thought to myself, when you did your presentation back in September, you did talk a little about race in the Catskills and racism in the Catskills. And here I think we saw 2 African-American characters, the performer, singer, and one of the cooks in the kitchen.
Yes.
But just tell us a little more, what kind of racial dynamic was going on in the Catskills in the late 50s and 60s?
Well, sadly, I mean, there was a great deal of racism, and it just reflected the way New York City was. You know, it was just very hard for Blacks to get jobs except for menial work. Yeah. Now we'll see that in Sweet Lorraine, where there are a couple of Black kids on the staff that interact with everybody in a very comfortable way. So that's interesting to see. But in this, Mrs. Maisel, then in this program, the Blacks are pretty much separate. There are no Black guests as far as I could see. Yeah. So, yeah.
Just a few more things that are coming in. One says, does anyone have fond memories of Brown's Hotel? Like Steiner's, but maybe a little less camp-like and a little more nighttime glitz. So I don't know if some of the others of you out there watching remember the Brown's Hotel, or Linda, if you remember the Brown's Hotel.
Yeah, I do remember it. And I think that's a very, very accurate description. Yeah, I mean, I think the group activities and all in Mrs. Maisel are really kind of blown up a little more, than they really were at that time. But the Browns was fancy and was beautifully done, and they had wonderful entertainment at night.
Somebody asked, what about Jewish observance or the Jewish observance level at the Catskills? Were these places kosher? Would they have had Shabbat dinners as gatherings, or was the religion toned down?
Um, they were kosher. Almost all were kosher. And there were a couple that weren't, that defined themselves as refined. So it's an interesting comment on assimilation. There's nothing in Mrs. Maisel that I remember where there's any observance at the hotels. They do have a Yom Kippur dinner at home, and they have a bris, but none of it's happening at the Catskill hotels, but it is happening within the family. I mean, the Jerusalem Post really liked the Jewish aspects of this series, but in the regular Catskills in real life, there were definitely observances. There was Shabbat dinner, there were rabbis who came in, a lot of the entertainment was done by cantors, and it was much more sort of basic Judaism rather than assimilated Jews, which is what the Maisel family, they're very assimilated. There's no sense of so-and-so in our family came from Poland and so we observe this tradition or whatever. It's never mentioned. It's very superficial.
Somebody mentions that the writer and producers are named Palladino, which doesn't sound like a Jewish name, and this person says that might explain the lack of attention to children, or perhaps some of this religious underplaying of that. And somebody else mentions that the musical producer grew up in Forest Hills. So I don't know if you know anything about the writer, producer, or musical side of this, but or just point that what they set out.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, yes, the musical side, I could see why a person from Forest Hills would have a sense of how to do the music. I thought it was very well done. In terms of the Palladinos, Italians are very family oriented also. So I don't know why the children don't come up, except that they don't matter for the storyline. So, Midge is trying to become herself, and she's trying to develop as an independent woman. I think there were a few comments about the show, and I read some reviews that some of the actresses at the time, I think another character who shows up later on, who Susie, the agent, also handles, has a false persona of herself. She's actually a very arrogant, wealthy person. The character is Sophie Lennon, for those who have watched more of the show. But she feels that she has to downplay her character to be a comedian, and she wears baggy clothes and she looks homely, and she gives Midge advice, don't be yourself. The men will eat you alive. Nobody wants women in this field. And Midge wants to be herself. And again, that's a very today value. It's not so much a value of the 50s where people were interested in conformity and not being too different. But Midge wants to be very outspoken.
And you point to an important thing here, which is this is not a documentary.
No, good point.
The Catskills in 1959. This is a story that has its own plot lines and characters that they just happen to place, or that they choose to place in this setting. And so what the things they emphasize or de-emphasize may not be because of historical accuracy, but may just be to emphasize where they're going with their story, or where the show is going. And
there's so much nostalgia for the Catskills that when people see that she's going to the Catskills, so many people will want to watch it of a certain age, and so they'll bring in viewers. Now, there are 26 episodes so far, and only 3 of them take place in the Catskills. So there's limited, I guess, emphasis on this particular place. But the 3 do set up the future, because she does do a comedy sketch. She does a midnight show at the Concord, which didn't exist, which is too bad. But supposedly the midnight show at the Concord was sort of raunchy. And she gets up and she gives this really just filthy but very funny act. And then she finds out that her father's in the audience. And that creates this whole family dynamic and what will happen. And then her family finds out what she's doing, and then it sets off the rest of the show.
I'm seeing a lot of people responded. Somebody worked in the dining room at Brown's.
Yeah.
Somebody remembered Brown's, and Jerry Lewis was there a lot.
Mhm.
Somebody says that their school friend's father was a cantor at Brown's. So
Mhm.
that's clearly a place that that people have a lot of memories about, which is super.
Yes.
I'm wondering about, we've talked a little about what things were evocative of the Catskills here. What are there any things that, as you were watching, you said, they're missing something crucial that was the Catskills, something that's missing from this episode that you would have thought in a depiction of the Catskills it would have included? Or maybe that's not the case, but I wanted to raise that with you.
That's a good point. The family issue was disturbingly missing. It would have been easy to put the children in. The son, I think Ethan is 4 and Esther is a baby. And so where is this baby? Who's feeding the baby? Don't they get up at night at some point? So I think that's really unfortunate that the family part of it isn't stressed from the point of view of Midge being a mother. It is stressed in terms of her being away with her parents. I mean, how many adults, she's somewhere in her mid to late 20s, would go away with their parents, right, on a vacation for 2 months? That's unusual. Even in 1959, it's very unusual, I think. But so they stress that part of it. But that gets an interesting person in there. Her father's very interesting, Abe, and he develops and changes. He quits his job. He does other stuff and does all kinds of stuff. Rose doesn't do too much. But in terms of her, Midge being a mother, it's just gone. It's too bad.
I have to say, Tony Shalhoub, his idiosyncrasies,
Mhm.
they win me over.
Yeah.
He's
He's very popular.
Yeah. I see somebody wrote in, I worked in the Catskills as a counselor in 1959 through 1963 at the
Oh,
Raleigh Hotel and
wow.
in Emerson. As a counselor, our role, she says, was to occupy the children. We were with them all day, during meals and at night. Parents attended the shows, and we did night patrol or babysitting by patrolling the buildings. The
Mhm.
goal was for the parents to enjoy totally, and children were to be occupied, entertained, and supervised all day. So another perspective on this family view.
Yes, yes. And I mean, it's true that children were occupied all day in the day camps. That's absolutely true. But there could have been a couple of lines where Midge at least worries to her mother. Do you think the children are happy? Something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
If it strikes me, one of the other stereotypes that this breaks is about alcohol consumption. I think the image of Jews as teetotalers is out there, and yet here we've got Abe tossing him back, trying to figure out when he's not going to be drunk, but he's always drunk.
It's very funny, actually, because I think the tomato juice that he gets when he checks in is really a Bloody Mary, right? Best homemade tomato juice. Like, I'd like one too. It looked good. But yeah, I mean, I think maybe I don't know, that didn't really ring true to me. I mean, unless, the feeling was, oh, he worked so hard all year and now he has the summer to just kick back and enjoy himself. It's unusual. I found it maybe something that would make more people relate to him in the general population.
Interesting.
Mhm.
You mentioned a little about this already, but somebody's asking about, you talked about the Jewish Alps of the Catskills, but the Italian Alps also. Were the Italian Alps or other areas, were they different religious focused or just ethnic focused? So here we've got the Jewish Catskills. Was it a Catholic Catskills or Roman Catholic?
It was Catholic. It wasn't religious, it was ethnic. But, it's like, why are cemeteries differentiated? Everybody in them is dead. Why do you have to have a Jewish cemetery versus, another Christian or a Catholic or a Protestant cemetery? And it's that people behave in certain ways when they're around people who are like them. And that was the thing really with the Catholic, with the Italian Alps versus the Alps, I shouldn't call them that, the Catskills versus the sour cream Sierras, which is what some people call the Catskills. So yeah, I mean, that's basically why. It's a matter of being comfortable around people with their particular, ways of handling things.
I was wondering if one of the things that's missing here is, and I don't know, I'm asking,
Mm-hmm.
Yiddish accents. You said there are a few lines where they toss in some, some Yiddish
Mhm.
phrases. But would the community using the Catskills, the Jewish community using the Catskills in the late 1950s, early 1960s, would more of them have been European immigrants who would have had accents?
Yes, definitely true. Definitely. Now, in terms of using Yiddish specifically, I think the higher up you go economically, the less Yiddish would be used. And Steiner's is really top of the line. So there's less of it. There's more of a sense of, we are Jewish Americans rather than we are American Jews. And it's different. The noun carries more weight than the adjective. And the people there had a different sense of themselves and of how they were relating to people. So definitely, I think the show would have been a little deeper if they'd had a few people with European accents. So that's a very good point, which I hadn't thought of. I like that.
You mentioned before about a number of resorts and how there were, shows going on all around the area. The
Mhm.
view we get in this episode is that people are staying on their resort. Was
Yes.
there much movement? Would somebody say, "Oh, I'm going to go catch the show at the Concord, even though I'm over at Brown's," or would people stay where they were?
Well, both would be true. Now, it costs more if you went somewhere else. So that's a problem. For some people, they'd rather stay where it costs less. However, people moved around a lot. There was not a new show every night at the hotel you were staying at. They might have the same entertainer 2 or 3 nights in a row. So you had to go somewhere else if you wanted entertainment every night. So there was a lot of moving around. But this place looks like they act as if they're in a bubble and nothing else exists except their place. And so why would you go anywhere else? There is nowhere else, which of course isn't true, but it works for the purposes of the show.
You mentioned this also about the different levels of the different hotels or bungalows, and somebody's saying that the view that they see here is much fancier than their own experience as they remember it at the bungalows.
Yes.
And so, could you just say a little more about what kind of economic range there was in the Catskills?
It's enormous. And that's one of the things about the Catskills at the time that was so unusual as a resort and vacation area, because you could be anywhere along the economic spectrum and find a place there. There were the very inexpensive places. There were basically boarding houses where you did your own cooking and you shared a kitchen and you had a room and the family stayed in a room. And the next level up were the bungalow colonies where people would have a whole house, but the house was teeny. It was 2 little bedrooms and a kitchen. Almost never was there a living room. There might be a porch, but you were expected to live outside. Everything was shared. The clotheslines, the Adirondack chairs, the grills, everything. And then you went up to the small hotels, and there you had somebody cooking for you. So you had a dining room where your meals were included. It was on the Club Med plan of everything being inclusive. And you went from there up to the resorts where you had the kind of personal attention that we see at Steiner's, where everybody who comes is a celebrity and is treated as if, oh my God, you're the most important person in the world. So there was a tremendous range. The bungalows are the ones that I find most people comment on. They had a good time at the large hotels. They didn't stay all summer. They stayed for 2 weeks or a long weekend. But the bungalow colonies where the children went to day camp and the fathers came up on the weekends and people were very close and very comfortable there.
And as you say, I mean, it is that range, the fact that people of all different economic ranges and socioeconomic groups would come to the Catskills maybe is a reason why it resonates so much still today, because kind of everybody was going there, even if you were very wealthy or not so wealthy. And so
Yes.
it was affecting such a large swath of the
Yes.
New York Jewish community.
Yes, and because most people were Jewish, the comedy was aimed at them. And at that time, people made fun of other ethnicities, men made fun of women. They were very sexist jokes, but they were funny if you're not offended, which of course today we are because it's a very different sensibility. But that doesn't work so well if you have too much of a mix of ethnicities. And so Jews would go there knowing that they were safe, that there wasn't anti-Semitism, and they had other people to be comfortable around.
I know we need to wrap this up, but I will just say, you know, a number of people are mentioning one of the big activities that they remember for the Catskills was food.
Oh, yes.
And particularly, I think, you know, I can imagine, given the food insecurities of Holocaust survivors and that being passed on to their children,
Mhm.
that to be in a place where food was, you know, all over and you could have as much as you want was really a break with the historical memory and a reason to make it feel good.
Right, something very special. And, you know, with the outfits and the hats and the dresses and everything, the show is fun to watch because of that. But it's very odd because Midge and her mother and anyone else there who was elegant was very skinny. I mean, like very skinny. And at the time, 1959, Marilyn Monroe wore a size 12, and she was a goddess of beauty. And it's only 14 years after the end of World War II. And you know, when there's war, there's deprivation, there's food shortages. Being skinny was the way things were in those years. And for the years after the war, people wanted you to be chubby so that you looked prosperous. So here they have a show where all the elegant people are rail thin because that works today. But it doesn't fit. It's something that's wrong. But people aren't going to care.
I think we need to stop. I want to give you, Linda, just a chance if there's any other final comments or thoughts that I haven't posed to you or our audience has not posed to you. Were there things that you wanted to mention about this episode and we haven't had a chance to?
Oh, I think would be nice if people wanted to watch more about the Catskills, if they wanted to watch the next 2 episodes and see how it plays out. There's a great deal more that's revealed about the time and place as seen by the Palladinos and the actors in the show and so on. So I would highly recommend that. It's a lot of fun.
Well, thanks very much, Linda. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And I hope you'll join us on Tuesday, March 9th at 6:30 for our next showing about the Catskills in a different form. Okay. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody. Have a lovely evening.
Good night.